This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Any questions, guys, before I get started? Anyone, any questions? Anyone, any questions, guys? And yes, I have a couple of emails to address. I will send across the replies today. I will take care of that. Any other questions apart from that? Anyone, any questions? Okay, so until now, we've been talking about services like, let's say, a virtual network and virtual machines and IIS servers running on a virtual machine, and let's say connectivity, point to site connections, and all these things out here as such. So these are mostly resources related to a network and computer. These are resources that are mostly related to, let's say, something called network and compute out here, wherein we are creating, let's say, the virtual networks. We are creating something called as a virtual machine for computational services and all these things out. And then we installed something called IIS on top of the virtual machine. And then we talked about load balancing. We talked about all these things out here as such. Now, all these services that we are creating right now, like virtual networks and all these things out, they generally are classified under a huge bucket called infrastructure as a service. They are called as infrastructure as a service. Now, why are they called as an infrastructure as a service? What exactly does Microsoft mean by infrastructure as a service out here? Is this? See, when you work with a cloud provider, could be any cloud provider again. It can be Amazon, it can be GCP, it can be Azure, whichever cloud provider that you're working with. The service offerings by the cloud provider are divided into three categories out here. Infrastructure as a service is the most, or which has the least pricing. Then you have something called as platform as a service, which is, let's say, moderate pricing. Then you have software as a service, high price. Talk about these things out here. So till now, as I said, we are doing something called infrastructure as a service. And when you do an infrastructure as a service, or when you go for something called as infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider gives you the basic infrastructure. Meaning, when I try to create a virtual machine, right, all I'm trying to do is take on rent the services like RAM, processors, core capacity, hard drives. All these are the processes, or all these are the infrastructure that I'm taking on rent. So if you look at the model, let me just go ahead and give a pyramid out here. Let me try to turn this out. Okay, fine. Fine. So when you talk about really something like infrastructure as a service out here, all you get is this, the infrastructure on rent. Again, when I say infrastructure, it's the RAM, it's the hard drive, it's the processors and all these things out, which forms the bottom layer of anything, which is called as the infrastructure layer. And this is the only thing, or this is the only layer that you get on rent, which is the bottom layer or the infrastructure layer. You can just call it anyways. This is nothing but your infra layer out here as such. Now on top of the infrastructure, now you have things like, now you cannot just use the infrastructure, can you? You need things like, let's say, very importantly, operating system, which forms the second layer, which is operating system, and I would say something called as a runtime. Meaning, just imagine that you are creating a virtual machine service, and you want to go ahead and run your own websites. So you go ahead and install something called as IIS. In order to install IIS, you also need to have the operating system before. So you need to have an operating system. Then you need to go ahead and let's say install IIS. Now let's say in the future, if you want to let's say run .NET applications, you might have to install all the supporting files that will help you run a .NET application. Like for example, you have something called as a .NET SDK software. Or if you want to run a Java application, you need to install all the files that will support you to run something known as a Java application out here. So all these things come under, or let's say come are classified under another category called as a runtime out here. So IIS, your Java software, your .NET or whatever it is that you install, all these things are your runtime. And the second thing is called as a runtime layer. And finally, on top of this runtime, we went ahead deployed a HTML code, right? We took just a simple HTML code, put it on a virtual machine, started working out. This is called as an application layer. The third layer, which is called as the application layer out here as such. So when I'm dealing with a cloud provider, right? And when I'm creating something known as the virtual networks or something called as the load balances and all these things out, this is the layer that I'm working on, which is called as my infrastructure layer out here. I'm just taking services on rent like RAM, hard drive, processor, and everything, and making sure that I am just paying for this one. But after that, right, the operating system, the runtime, which is nothing but IIS, so, a couple of softwares that I installed, all these things have to be managed by me, by the user, whoever is using this out. This layer, right, the infrastructure as a service layer, this is managed by the cloud provider. Safety. And if I say that this is managed by the cloud provider, which means that frequent updates to the hard drive, frequent updates to the processor, and maintenance of them, meaning maintenance of all these things inside a data center, is all taken care by your cloud provider. But the runtime, meaning the operating system updates, software that you install, those updates, all these things, the runtime layer is completely managed by the user. And also the application layer is also managed by you, managed by the user. Meaning, since you are going ahead and let's say installing the runtime, since you are going ahead and let's say deploying your own applications, this or these two layers that you see on my screen are managed by the user completely, making it an infrastructure as a service wherein you are just going ahead and taking infrastructure on rent. Now the next model that comes into picture is called as a platform as a service. Now we haven't discussed on what a platform as a service really is. In today's session, that's the attempt. It's going to be, let's say, to go ahead and let's say discuss on what is platform as a service. How do you create something and something like that, wherein not only the bottom infrastructure, but also the second runtime layer, right? Which is your operating system, which is the Java app, the Java software that you install, the .NET software that you install, and all these things. Right? These two layers are together packed, and they are given to you as a service, which is called as a platform as a service or a Paas service, platform as a service out here as such. And when you say platform as a service out here, infrastructure maintenance. So this is now managed by Microsoft. by MS Microsoft. This is, however, which was managed by Microsoft. And this layer also now is managed by the only thing that you manage, or the only thing that you as get, is this one. This is nothing but. So when I say application layer, you are primarily responsible to go ahead, create a code, deploy a code on a service. How do you deploy it? Whether you do manual or whether you implement some DevOps strategies and all these things out. This is not what a cloud provider is concerned about. But you take care of only this particular top layer and sending across the responsibility to manage your OS, to manage your runtime and etc. to the cloud provider out here. And finally, you have something called as a software as a service, where all the three layers are managed by your cloud provider. All the three layers, meaning you just go to a cloud provider, tell them that you know what, or you just go to, let's say, a vendor, tell them that you know what, I don't really care about the infrastructure, nor I care about the operating system, and I don't have the expertise to write my own code. Please give me an end-to-end application so that I can start using it out. Such a kind of a service is called as a software as a service out here. Such again, there are good diagrams on the internet. If you just say Iaas, Paas, and SaaS, software as a service, and just look at the images out here, and let's see this one. This is what they talk about. Just scroll down. Let's see if I have a good image to show you all. Okay, okay, fine. So let's see this. So this is what it really tells you out here as such. On an on-premise model, when I say on-premise, you buy your own server, you let's say go ahead and manage everything, literally everything out. Manage the storage, the servers, the networking, virtualization, operating system, everything is something that you manage. Every green that you see is something that you manage out here. But when you go for infrastructure as a service on the cloud provider, you get to manage everything that is in green, which is nothing but, or now, the virtualization, server, networking, and all these things, or these layers are managed by your cloud provider, wherein the OS, middleware, runtime, data, applications, and etc. is managed by you. Finally, when you come down to something called as a platform as a service, the amount of management that you have to take is very less. It's just the application and just the data that you basically go ahead and manage out. Just the application, just the data that you go ahead and manage out. Wherein in a software as a service, all these things, meaning everything that you see on the screen, is managed by an external provider or a cloud provider out here as such. And since it's managed completely end to end by a cloud provider, the cost is also very high when you compare to, let's say, a software as a service out here as such. Yes, any questions till here that I can take? Anyone, any questions I can take till here on what is structure as a service, what is software as a service, and what is platform as a service out here as such? Anyone, any questions guys? Any questions? Are we good? Can we move forward? Can I move forward? Guys, can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Yes. All right, so let's move forward then. Then how do I, or what is the example of a platform as a service, and how do we create one in, let's say, our Azure cloud out here as such? So very firstly, there are a couple of resources or there are a couple of services that are a very good example of platform as a service. For example, storage accounts are an example of something called as platform as a service. I'll say storages. Then one of the very popular examples of a platform as a service is called as a web app or an app service. or app service is something that you can call this as. This is the example that we are going to look at on what is a web app, what is the app service, sorry, what is a web app, what is the app service, how do you use an app service, how do you, let's say, use this particular service and all these things out. And then you, of course, have services like SQL databases and everything that can fall under a platform as a service category out here as such. Now, in my case, let's go with something known as an app service. So, how do I create it again? Firstly, I would need a resource group, I need a subscription, tenant, and all these things. Uh, if you do, you can create a resource group while creating the app service, shouldn't be an issue. Now, to create an app service, just go and search for app service. So, you have something called app service Azure. So it's called app service out here. I do not have anything. I'll just go ahead and say create. So I'm saying create, and very firstly, it's asking me what is the subscription that you want to create this in. My subscription is Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. This is where I'm creating it in. I'll just scroll down. It's asking me what is the resource group under which you want to create this particular app service in. I'll just go ahead and say, since I do not have a resource group here, I'll just say create new, and I'll say something like demo RG. Anything is good enough. I'll say okay. I'll just scroll down, and now it's asking me what is the name of the app service out here. When you just go ahead and create a service, it's going to add a name, ask a name. I'll say it is a demo web app or app service in North Europe, something like this. Some unique name. I'm giving some unique name out here. And as and when I give a name, right, Microsoft is going to go ahead and give me something called as a fully qualified domain name. So this is demo app service dot azure websites dot net, meaning this is a complete web server, unlike a virtual machine. So when I created a virtual machine, I can convert my virtual machine either into a web server or into, let's say, a DNS server or into, let's say, a fax server. I can go ahead give multiple roles to it. But unlike a virtual machine, wherein I have much more control, Paas service, meaning a web app, is something that I do not have a lot of control on. I have to create it as a web server, meaning as an internet service out here as such. So I would say, okay, fine, you know what? It's demo app service and new dot azure websites.net. This is good. Then it's asking me, how do you want to publish your code, or what kind of, let's say, a code you have. Please select this option for now, which is called code. Then it's asking me runtime stack, meaning it's telling me, okay, fine, since that you have or you are going ahead and trying to run a code, can you tell me what kind of a code is it, or in which language your code is actually written in. So as of now, your app services supports code which is of a .NET. Guys, any questions, anyone? Please go on mute if you do not have a question. Fine. So you have something called as a .NET application, meaning you can design your entire code in .NET and go ahead and, let's say, deploy it on top of your application out here. This is something that you can do. Then you have, let's say, you can design it in Java, you can say Node, you can say PHP, Ruby, Python, etc. What I'll do, since I'm starting, I'll say, okay, fine, I will select a language called .NET Core 3.1. I'll say, okay, fine, I'll do a .NET Core 3.1. It's saying it's about to reach the end of life. I'm good with that, not a problem. I'll select this out. I'll just scroll down. Now it's asking me, what is the operating system that you want here? Again, just to take a comparison between the creation of a virtual machine and an app service is this. See, in a virtual machine, when you go ahead and say something called as an image, when you start creating a virtual machine and you start creating, or when you start, let's say, saying something called as image out here, there are multiple things that you can actually select. You can say 2019 data center, you can say 2022 Windows, you can say, if you do not want Windows, you can say Linux, or you can say Mac OS, you can say multiple OSs out there that are available. There is a host of operating systems that you can go ahead and, let's say, select and install it out. But very importantly, you will have to manage all these things out. Whatever you install on a virtual machine, like whatever operating system that you deploy in a virtual machine, whether it be Windows or whether it be Linux and etc., you will have to make sure that you are regularly updating it. You are going ahead and, let's say, patching it out and all that stuff. But when you come to a Paas service, it's just asking you two different options out here. It's just asking you whether you want a Windows, whether you want a Linux, because in a Paas service, operating system is something that you're not really taking care of. This is something that you do not really, let's say, take care of. This is something which is managed by your cloud provider. So, cloud provider is telling me, since I manage it, I have a say in here. I cannot tell you, or I cannot give you, let's say, all the operating systems that are available out there. Just tell me what kind of an operating system you want. I'll say it's Windows. It's asking me what is the region you want to create. I'll just take a random region out here. I'll scroll down. Now I have something called as an app service plan. Very importantly, in order to create an app service or an Azure web app, you will need an underlying app service plan out here. That's the first resource that actually gets created. App service plan. This is how it really looks like. This is this diagram, which is looks like how it looks like. You have something known as an app service plan. App service plan is the bottom infrastructure, meaning this will ask you, or when you create a virtual machine, you get to choose the size of a virtual machine, right? Telling that it's 2 core or something like that. When you create a web app, you get to create, or you get to choose the size of the web app depending upon the app service plan out here. And an app service that we are creating right now will be created under an app service plan. It'll be running under an app service plan, which means that if I go back here, it's telling me it's Windows plan and etc. I can go and say this is a demo plan. I'll say okay. And here it's telling me that okay, fine, you can go and change size. I'll click on this. And then I have something called as a specification picker, wherein I have three different kinds of specifications out here. One is called as a dev test for basic development and testing. The other one is called production. Third one is called isolation or isolated. We'll talk about those things out here. But when you go under something called as a dev test, when you go under something known as a dev test out here, you have things like F1, D1, B1, B2, and B3 out here, wherein it's now telling me that if you choose a plan called F1, I will give you a 1 GB RAM or a 1 GB memory and 60 minutes per day of compute. When it says 60 minutes per day of compute, which means that if you select this uh, and you create your own app service and give it to someone or give it the link to, let's say, the internet, people will be able to use it for 1 hour. That's it. After 1 hour, it won't really work out here. That's called 60-minute compute, which is
Hi, Kiran, your voice has been stopped.
okay. Am I audible now? Lost voice,
Yes,
yes.
Yes, you're
Great.
right.
All right. So yes. So as I was telling, F1 is a free service. So you get somewhere around 1 GB of RAM, just 1 GB of memory, very low powered capacity, and it will give you 60 minutes of compute per day. When I say 60 minutes of compute per day, after you create an app service, and if you give this link to someone on the internet and they start using this out, they can use it for 1 hour per a given day. That's it. Meaning it's a website. They can just go ahead, browse it for 1 hour per a given day, or if it's an application server, it's trying to do something, it can only be running for 1 hour out here for basic purpose, for very basic, for development slash testing. It's just a dev slash test, development slash testing out here as such. Then of course you have additional things like D1, B1 and everything. But if you look at it, right, each and everything has its own features out here. Wherein here in D1, you are going to get the same 1 GB memory, a very low powered capacity, but 240 minutes per day compute, which means instead of 1 hour, you are getting 4 hours out here. But if you want that, you need to pay somewhere around 683 per a month, which means that if you are using a free trial subscription and if you are running this particular application for an entire month, from that 14,000 credits that you have, 683 rupees is going to get deducted out here as such. Then you have something called as B1, the next series of, let's say, compute, B2, B3, and etc. And each and every series, right, when you go, let's say, when you scale up your series, there is something called 100 total ACUs. Instead of now giving you, let's say, something like a memory, Azure is now giving you something called as a compute units. Meaning, if you, let's say, go ahead and start working with this website, the compute units are the backend processing power out here as such. Like you have an i3 processor, i5 processor, and etc. The compute units are going to go inside in the background, and they are going to, let's say, help you process the requests that are coming to your application out here as such. So as and when you increase your plan from B1 to B2, B2 to B2 to B3, the compute units that you get, even they are going to get increased, and also the memory that you're going to get. Here you have a 1.75 GB of memory. Here you have a 3.5. Here you have a 7 GB of memory. Even that's going to increase, and also the price. And if you observe, each and every plan, right, that you see on my screen is double its before plan. Meaning, for example, D1 you are getting charged around 683 rupees per a month. When you upscale, meaning when you scale up to B1, you are getting 2314, almost twice what it was earlier. And then if you come down to B2, you're going to be charged at, let's say, 4628. Then you, let's say, into B3, you are getting charged around, let's say, 9,000 something like this. These are all for development and testing, meaning low powered machines, low capacity machines out here just for development. Wherein when you go into something known as production, you have something called S1, P1 V2, P2 V2, P3 V3, and etc., which are high capacity machines, high powered machines, meaning especially for production based scenarios. We'll talk about what is a production based scenario out here, which means usually a live application. But for now, what I'll do, I'll just go ahead and say F1. I'll start with a free plan called as a demo plan out here. Again, when you're trying to create this in a free trial subscription, the only thing that you're going to see here is called F1. Microsoft will not give you an option to change this while creating the service. You can change it after creating the service. That is not a problem. So you can change this plan after you create the service anytime. It's allowed to do it. Anytime you can scale up or scale down to a higher plan or to a lower plan respectively. But what I'll do is, like, I'll say, okay, fine, I'm good with the free trial subscription or the free subscription out here or the free plan out here. And I would say next into deployment, and I'm not touching the deployment section here, nothing here as such. I will say networking. I will switch my networking off. I'll say monitoring. I'll also disable this off. We will take the monitoring section altogether a separate demo. So I'll just disable this monitoring, let's say, thing off. So I'll say monitoring off, say tags, and I'll say review and create. So what I'm doing is that I'm creating my first app service. And when I'm creating the app service, I'm also creating something called as an app service plan with a capacity called F1 or with a size called F1 out here as such. So F1 is the size that I'm creating this plan in, and I'll hit the create button out here as such. So what this is going to do right now is that this is going to create me two different components called an app service plan and an app service. Again, app service plan is nothing but the underlying infrastructure, which means that app service plan is representing things like the memory, is representing things like the hardware, those things out here as such. And on top of which, I'm going ahead and creating something known as an app service. Again, under one app service plan, you can have multiple app services that are running. There is no, let's say, limit. Whereas there are multiple app services that you can go ahead and create, and each and every app service shares the underlying memory. When I say shares the underlying memory, the app service plan is coming with a capacity, right? Let's say something like 1 GB. These three app services share this particular 1 GB out here, depending upon the usage, depending upon, let's say, a couple of things. They go ahead and share the underlying capacity out here as such. So if I just go back, now it says the app service is created. So it will go into the resource group. Even the resource group got created. And now I'm able to see something called as an app service plan. Again, you'll have to just wait for a minute and refresh this out. It would have also gone ahead and created something called as the app service. So two things get created while you create the app service. One is the plan. The second one, the app service itself. So let me wait for a minute. And now I have something called as the app service out here as such. So I have a plan and I have an app service. And let me first go into the plan, understand what is all mentioned in there, and then let's come back to the app service out here. So I'll say demo plan. So this is the app service plan that I have, and in here it is telling that this is demo plan. It is F1 free, meaning it's a free tier plan that you have with a Windows operating system. The resource group in which it is created, the status of the app service, the location where it is created, and also something called apps or slots. If I just click on this, it's telling me that okay, fine, there is one app that is actually running as a part of this particular app service plan, which is nothing but demo, something like this, which is the one which this is the one that we created. And there are other things like activity log, the identity and access management, and then something like scale up and scale down services, scale up and scale out services, and etc., which we are going to talk. And if I go into the other resource, this is nothing but your app service. Again, here you have things like what is the resource group name, what is the status of the app service, is it running, is it stopped, what exactly is the status out here. The location, meaning where it is created. Here in my case, it is ECS2 out here. The URL, very importantly, how can you access this particular app service? And Azure is telling, okay, fine, you can access this app service by something like a URL out here. There is no public IP, there's nothing that I created, there's no virtual network, nothing that I created. Reason being, again, this is a platform as a service. So all the networking is handled by your cloud provider. So everything, networking, everything is handled by the cloud provider out here. This is something that we are not really touching out here. And it says FTP state and all these things, which we'll talk about what is the FTP state and everything. But if I just go ahead, click on browse, or if I click on the URL, it has a sample code that is already replied for me. I do not have to install IIS. I do not have to go inside the app service. I do not have to do anything. It's a default page that got installed for me, or it's a default page basically that Microsoft is presenting me right now, wherein it is telling me that okay, fine, your web app is running and waiting for your content, meaning you can now go ahead deploy any content that you wish to. We'll also see how do you deploy a content and all these things out. So it's telling you have, let's say, the web application running, it's all good and all that stuff. And this is a HTTPS service. The link itself is a HTTPS, unlike when we are creating a virtual machine, right? It was a HTTP service, which means that even the security of your website is handled by Microsoft. I do not do anything. Even the security of, let's say, my web applications or the security of my sites is handled by, let's say, the system, or is handled by the cloud provider. It is also handled by the cloud provider out here as such. Now, this is the app service, which is running on the app service plan, which means that whenever you as a user from your browser, right? So you are a user from your browser, you're going ahead and let's say interacting with a website called something.azurewebsites.net. Let's say my website is called xyz.azurewebsites.net. I'm interacting with this particular website out here, and as and when I interact with this particular website, the request is going to get diverted to the backend running app service, because this particular app service is hosting my application. So the request is getting diverted to the backend running app service out here, and the app service needs to process your request, for which it needs a hardware. And in this case, hardware is provided to you by an app service plan. Is provided to you by something known as an app service plan out here. So it's going ahead and sending the request back to the app service plan. And app service plan contains nothing but, let's say, your compute and etc., meaning the RAM and all these things out, RAM and everything. It will process your request, send back the response to the app service. The app service will, let's say, talk to your, talk to the, let's say, browser, and the browser will talk back to you out here as such, or will give you the request back to you out here as such. So it's rather a very simple mechanism. I haven't done anything really, let's say, different. I just went ahead, created an app service in Azure, and while creating the app service plan also got created, and the app service plan is acting now as my processing power, while the web app is acting like a front end application for my website. Meaning, I can just go ahead, click on this one. Again, you can do a lot of code development, deploy a lot of code, and etc. This is something that we are going to see. But this is the basic, or this is the basics of what is app service and what is an app service plan out here till here. So yes, any questions till here that I can take? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? Okay. Since you do not have a question, let me move forward. Now, this is the basic content. It's telling that the web application is running and all these things out. Again, if I even give this link to anyone who's in the online class, anyone, let's say, who's trying it on, let's say, on laptops, you can just go ahead, click on this one, and you will still be able to see, let's say, this particular, let's say, page telling that the web application is running and so on and so forth. Now, in order to change this content, meaning in order to, let's say, go ahead and take my own content out here, the app service supports something called as an FTP, file transfer protocol. It gives you something called as an FTP service out here, which means that you can just take the files from your local machine, meaning your local laptop, copy and paste it inside the app service out here. Now, in order to enable this service, under your app service settings, just go into something called configuration. And here you have multiple things like general configurations, you'll have application services configuration and all these things out. What I'll do is I'll go into the general settings, just scroll down, just say FTP state all allowed, and just save this out. This is the first step that we need to do, is that we go under the settings of the app service into the configuration, just change the FTP state to all allowed. Once this is done, you can use your app service for an FTP transfer. What does that mean is this: in order to, let's say, use this service, I need to have an FTP software. Just go to the internet and say WinSCP download. This is one of the recommended softwares by Microsoft, telling WinSCP, which is an FTP tool, meaning which is a tool which will help you copy files into your app service. Just go here and click on the download button. It's a very simple installation process. Once you click on the download button, you get an exe file. Double click on that, and once you install it, you will be able to see a software, or you will be able to see an application called WinSCP out here as such. It looks something like this, and this is the first page. It tells you that, you know what, go ahead, log in out here. Now go ahead, let's say try to log in out here, and it's asking me for something called as a host name. Let me go back into my app service, and this is what it's looking for, something called as an FTP host name out here. So I'll copy this out. I'll say this is the FTP host name, and now it's asking me what is the username and password of this particular website. Guys, can anyone tell me, did we give any username and password for this particular website while we created it, or for this particular app service while we created it out here as such? Did we do that?
No.
Oh,
Okay, then what ID and what password is it really asking me? And what do you think, or where do you think will I get the same thing out here as such? Anyone? What ID? Is it my Azure portal ID, or do you think what exactly it's asking me out here as such?
Portal ID.
yes, I see. Portal
Uh,
ID.
Portal ID. But if you give the portal ID, how will it even know which service it needs to log in out here? Let me also try the portal ID out here. I'll say classes Azure DevOps, gmail.com. I'll just go give my password out here. Access denied. It's simply telling me that, you know what, this is not the ID that I'm looking for. When you created a virtual machine, do you all remember we gave the ID and password?
Yeah.
Yes, test user and Microsoft.
Yeah, something like that. It's looking for not your user ID and password, not the portal ID and the password. It's looking for the ID and the password for this specific app service, but I haven't given that because this is not under my control. Operating system is not under my control, so the username and password is not under my control out here. But Microsoft gives you some basic capability out here as such. If you look at this one on the OU page, there is something called Get Publish Profile. Now, if you click on this one, you will have something called as the Publish Settings. And if I open this out in a notepad, in here, Microsoft is going to expose the username and password of this particular service. If I just scroll to the right, you have something called username and user password. So this entire thing is the username. Copy here is a little difficult, so let me go ahead and copy this out. This entire thing is the username out here. You go back and take this out. I'll put the username here. We come back to the notepad. This is the password. It has something called username and password out here as such. So I can just go ahead and copy the entire password with this in which is in quotes. Again, this is something that I haven't created. This is something that Microsoft has created and maintaining it for me. And I'll say login out here as such. So now what is happening right now is that I am now inside the app service, and I'm now inside one of the folders of the app service called site and root. Isn't this the same folder on the virtual machine also that we were working on? So inside the virtual machine, there is something called www root folder, inside which we were putting our own content, and then your virtual machine was able to identify that particular content and browse it over. I mean, you were able to browse it over the internet out here. In here, I have something called as the hosting start.html page, which is the default page. And the reason being, you're able to see, let's say, some kind of page out there. Here I have something called hosting start.html, and Microsoft now will allow me to go ahead and make some basic modifications out here. Meaning I can go ahead put my own code. Reason being, this is a platform as a service. And if you look at the diagram, right, that we were looking at, this is the layer that you're going to work on. Both the layers are managed by, let's say, the cloud provider, but this is the layer, which is nothing but your application layer, is where you go ahead and, let's say, change the code or update your code or deploy a new code and all these things out here as such. So that's what we're going to see. How do you change the code and etc. in the coming classes. But what I want you all to do is just go and create a very basic app service. Just try to go through what are all the blades of the app service. Like for example, what is access identity and access control? What happens if you give a role directly out here? Then just go into the configuration and just go through the documentation out here. That's the expectation. And before coming to the next class, please download this particular software called WinSCP on your laptop so that we can start using the same thing out here as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here?
Hi Suresh, Ranjit here.
Good,
So,
Vish.
what is the reason we need to select during the free trial? Because I
What?
tried to select on the East US too, and it's throwing me some error, like a
Okay.
reason is not applicable.
Yes, because it's a free trial subscription, so you cannot create the service in all the regions. You can try
Okay,
East US, Central US, or you can try North Central US out here.
no, etc. Okay,
North Central
fine.
US, East US, Central US, or West US 3. These are a couple of regions that are available out here as such.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yes. Any more questions here, guys? Anyone? Any more questions here? Okay, and I think I have a couple of emails to address. I think Deepak, you have sent me an email about the PowerShell script. That's something that I'll address. And Pavni, I think you have sent me an email about the point to site. That's something that I'll take. But Deepak, one quick request out here is please make sure to attach your script as well. Because with the screenshot, I won't be able to, let's say, really figure out what you're doing. Please attach your script in a TXT document so that I can look at that. And for this email out here, uh, it doesn't look like you're even executing the script as such. You're just going ahead giving the name called test2. I don't know what test2 out here really means. You're not giving really the name out here. You're just going ahead and let's say typing out test2. This will not work. You will have to execute your script and then give the name out here as such. That's the reason if you look at the error, that's what it's telling you. It doesn't really understand what test2 here out here as such is. So please send me across your script, attach it in the file or attach it in the email so that I can take a look at it and address the same thing out here as such.
Okay.
All right, any more questions here, guys? Anyone, any questions before I close? Okay, so we'll continue the discussion in the next class and we'll look at what app service really is. How can you, let's say, really work with an app service and all these things. Until then, have a good day ahead and we'll meet in the next session. Thanks, guys.